In 1942, Artillery Sergeant Robert Hayes vanished from Wendover Air Base, and for 82 years his family asked only one question: where did our son go that desert night? In 2024, bones discovered by an archaeological team provided the answer to this question. But the truth that emerged was not the kind of answer the family had ever expected. Because Robert Hayes hadn't just disappeared, he had been the victim of a planned execution. Before diving into this incredible story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell to stay updated with the latest cold case revelations. The autumn of 1942 brought an unusual chill to the Utah desert, where Wendover Air Base stretched across the barren landscape like a mirage made real. The base, situated on the Nevada-Utah border, had become one of America's most crucial training facilities in the months following Pearl Harbor. Here, in the vast emptiness of the Great Salt Lake Desert, young airmen learned the deadly arts of high-altitude bombing that would soon rain destruction upon the Axis powers. Among the thousands of military personnel who called Wendover home was Artillery Sergeant Robert Hayes, a 24-year-old from the farming community of Cedar City, Utah. Robert possessed the quiet competence that marked the best of America's rural youth: steady hands, sharp eyes, and an unshakable sense of duty that had been forged in the wheat fields and cattle ranches of his childhood. His letters home spoke of his pride in serving his country and his eagerness to prove himself worthy of the trust placed in him by a nation at war. The son of a Methodist minister and a schoolteacher, Robert had grown up believing in the fundamental goodness of people and the ultimate triumph of right over wrong. These beliefs, instilled through countless Sunday sermons and evening prayers around the family dinner table, had shaped him into the kind of young man who volunteered to help neighbors with their harvest, who never missed church on Sunday, and who enlisted in the Army within hours of learning about Pearl Harbor. Wendover Air Base in 1942 was a world unlike anything Robert had ever experienced. The base sprawled across thousands of acres of desert scrubland, its runways and hangars shimmering in the desert heat like something from another planet. B-24 Liberator bombers lined the flight lines, their massive forms casting shadows that offered precious relief from the relentless sun. The sound of aircraft engines was constant, a low, rumbling reminder of the deadly serious work being conducted in this remote corner of America. The base housed not only American military personnel, but also something that would have seemed impossible just a year earlier: a prisoner of war camp containing captured German and Italian soldiers. These men, taken in the early campaigns in North Africa and the Mediterranean, had been transported halfway around the world to spend the duration of the war in the American desert. The Geneva Convention required their humane treatment, and they were housed in barracks that, while hardly luxurious, provided adequate shelter, food, and medical care. Among the German prisoners was a man who called himself Klaus Weber, though that name, like almost everything else about him, was a carefully constructed lie. Weber appeared to be in his early 30s, of medium height and build, with the kind of unremarkable features that allowed him to blend seamlessly into crowds. He spoke excellent English, with only a trace of accent, claimed to have been a clerk in the German army, and presented himself as a man eager to cooperate with his American captors and wait out the war in relative peace. What made Weber particularly dangerous was not his physical capabilities, though he was far more fit and capable than he appeared, but his ability to inspire trust and confidence in those around him. Guards found him helpful and deferential, always ready with a respectful "yes, sir," or an offer to assist with minor tasks. Fellow prisoners looked to him as a natural leader, someone who could mediate disputes and maintain order in the difficult circumstances of captivity. But beneath Weber's carefully constructed persona lay the truth. He was Hauptmann Klaus Richter of the Abwehr, Germany's military intelligence service. Richter had been captured deliberately as part of an elaborate plan to infiltrate American military installations and gather intelligence that could be transmitted to German forces. His false identity had been prepared meticulously, complete with fabricated personal history, forged documents, and a cover story designed to withstand careful scrutiny. The plan that had brought Richter to Wendover Air Base was part of a larger German intelligence operation aimed at disrupting American military training and gathering information about new weapons and tactics being developed for use against the Third Reich. German intelligence had correctly identified Wendover as a crucial training facility, and Richter's mission was to gather detailed information about American bombing techniques, aircraft capabilities, and personnel movements that could be used to develop countermeasures. Richter had been operating successfully for several months when he became aware of a development that threatened to compromise not only his own mission, but the entire German intelligence network operating within American POW camps. Artillery Sergeant Robert Hayes, through a combination of keen observation and unfortunate coincidence, had begun to piece together clues that suggested all was not as it seemed among the prisoners at Wendover. The first hint that something was amiss came when Hayes noticed that Weber seemed to know far more about American military procedures and equipment than a simple German clerk should have known. During casual conversations, Weber occasionally let slip observations about American artillery techniques or aircraft performance that suggested a level of knowledge and expertise that didn't match his supposed background. These comments might have gone unnoticed by most people, but Hayes had the kind of analytical mind that noticed inconsistencies and remembered details. The second clue came when Hayes observed Weber engaged in what appeared to be suspicious activities during evening recreation periods. While most prisoners spent their free time playing cards, writing letters, or simply resting, Weber could often be seen sketching in a small notebook. When Hayes managed to catch a glimpse of these sketches, he was surprised to see that they appeared to be detailed diagrams of base facilities, aircraft configurations, and personnel routines, exactly the kind of information that would be valuable to German intelligence services. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when Hayes accidentally intercepted a coded message that Weber was attempting to transmit through the prisoner mail system. The message, hidden within what appeared to be an innocuous letter to a fictitious relative in Germany, contained information about American bombing training procedures and planned deployments that could only have been obtained through systematic espionage activities. Hayes faced a terrible dilemma. His discovery of Weber's true activities put him in possession of information that could expose a major security breach and potentially save American lives. But it also placed him in mortal danger, as Weber would undoubtedly kill to protect his cover and continue his mission. Hayes had to decide whether to report his suspicions immediately, risking that Weber might escape justice, or to gather more evidence to ensure that his accusations would be taken seriously. The decision to continue his investigation rather than report immediately would prove to be fatal. Hayes began carefully documenting Weber's activities, taking photographs when possible, and keeping detailed notes about suspicious behaviors. He planned to present a complete case to military intelligence officers armed with irrefutable evidence that would expose Weber's espionage activities and potentially lead to the discovery of other German agents operating within the American military system. But Weber was far too experienced and cautious an operator to allow his activities to be observed without taking notice. He quickly became aware that Hayes was watching him, and his training told him that the American sergeant represented a threat that had to be eliminated. The only question was how to accomplish this without arousing suspicion or compromising his own position within the prisoner population. The solution that Weber devised was both elegant and terrifying in its simplicity. He would use his position of trust among both prisoners and guards to lure Hayes into a situation where he could be killed without witnesses and where his death could be made to appear accidental or the result of some other cause. The vast desert surrounding Wendover Air Base provided the perfect location for such a crime, thousands of square miles of empty wasteland where a body could remain hidden for decades. The plan began to take shape in early November 1942, when Weber volunteered to assist with a routine maintenance project that required work to be done outside the main base perimeter. This type of work detail was common, as prisoner labor was used for various construction and maintenance tasks that helped support the base's operations. Hayes, in his capacity as an artillery sergeant, was assigned to supervise the work detail and ensure that security protocols were maintained. Weber arranged for the work detail to be scheduled during the evening hours, when the desert temperatures were more tolerable and fewer people would be present to observe their activities. He also made sure that the work site was located in a remote area of the base, far from the main facilities and well away from regular patrol routes. These arrangements were easy to make, as Weber's reputation for reliability and cooperation made guards willing to accommodate his suggestions about work scheduling and procedures. On the evening of November 18, 1942, Hayes accompanied a small group of prisoners, including Weber, to a maintenance site approximately 3 miles from the main base facilities. The work involved repairing a section of fence that had been damaged by recent storms, a routine task that was expected to take several hours to complete. Hayes brought with him a small military radio for communication with base security, as well as his service weapon and a flashlight for illuminating the work area. The first few hours of the work detail proceeded normally, with the prisoners working steadily under Hayes' supervision while desert darkness settled over the landscape. Weber made casual conversation with Hayes, discussing topics ranging from the weather to the progress of the war, gradually building the kind of rapport that would make his eventual betrayal even more shocking. As the evening wore on and the work neared completion, Weber suggested that he and Hayes walk a short distance from the work site to survey a section of fence that might also need repair. This suggestion seemed reasonable, as thorough inspection of base perimeter security was an important responsibility, and Hayes agreed to accompany Weber on what he believed would be a brief reconnaissance mission. The two men walked approximately half a mile into the desert, their flashlights cutting narrow beams through the darkness, while the sounds of the work detail faded behind them. Weber maintained his friendly demeanor, commenting on the stark beauty of the desert landscape and speculating about what the area might have looked like before the military base was constructed. When they reached a small depression in the desert floor, surrounded by sagebrush and hidden from view of the work site, Weber made his move. The attack was swift and professional, demonstrating the combat training that he had concealed so carefully during his months of captivity. Hayes, caught completely off guard by his trusted companion's sudden transformation into a deadly enemy, had no opportunity to defend himself or call for help. Weber's method was brutally efficient. A knife thrust between the ribs that pierced Hayes' heart, causing death within seconds while minimizing the amount of blood that would create evidence. The weapon itself was a makeshift blade that Weber had crafted from materials available within the prison compound, designed to be deadly effective while being easily concealed and disposed of after use. After confirming that Hayes was dead, Weber faced the challenge of disposing of the body in a way that would prevent its discovery and eliminate any evidence that might lead back to him. The desert environment provided both opportunities and challenges for this task. While the vast, empty landscape offered numerous locations where a body could be hidden, the lack of vegetation and water meant that natural processes of decomposition would be slow, and that remains might be preserved for extended periods. Weber chose a location approximately 2 miles from the fence repair site where a small arroyo provided natural concealment and where flash flooding during the spring runoff might help to scatter any evidence. He spent several hours carefully burying Hayes' body and personal effects, using tools that he had brought along under the pretense of fence repair work. The grave was shallow but carefully camouflaged, designed to be invisible to casual observation while taking advantage of natural erosion patterns that would help conceal the disturbance over time. After completing the grim task of burial, Weber returned to the work site and calmly reported that Sergeant Hayes had been called away on urgent business and had instructed the work detail to complete their assigned tasks and return to the main base. This explanation was accepted without question by the other prisoners, who had no reason to suspect that anything unusual had occurred. The next morning, when Hayes failed to report for duty, his absence was initially attributed to the kind of minor administrative confusion that was common in the busy atmosphere of wartime military operations. It was not until the second day of his absence that serious concern began to develop and official inquiries were initiated to determine his whereabouts. The investigation into Hayes' disappearance was hampered by the same factors that had made Weber's crime possible in the first place. The vast size of the base and the surrounding desert meant that there were countless places where someone could become lost or encounter difficulty. Moreover, the intense pace of wartime operations meant that personnel were constantly being transferred, reassigned, or dispatched on various missions, making it difficult to maintain accurate records of everyone's whereabouts at all times. Military police conducted extensive searches of the base and surrounding areas, using both ground patrols and aircraft to cover the thousands of square miles of desert that stretched in every direction from Wendover. They interviewed Hayes' fellow soldiers, reviewed his recent activities and correspondence, and investigated any possible motives for desertion or other voluntary absence from duty. The investigation also included questioning of the German prisoners who had been present during the fence repair work detail. Weber, when interviewed, expressed appropriate concern about Hayes's disappearance and provided what appeared to be helpful information about the sergeant's behavior and comments during their last evening together. He mentioned that Hayes had seemed troubled about some unspecified matter but had not elaborated on the nature of his concerns. Weber's performance during the investigation was masterful, displaying just the right combination of concern, cooperation, and ignorance to avoid arousing suspicion while providing information that subtly misdirected the investigation. He suggested that Hayes might have become disoriented in the darkness and wandered into the desert, or that he might have been called away on some secret mission that prevented him from informing his subordinates of his departure. As weeks passed without any trace of Hayes, the official investigation began to focus on the possibility that he had deserted his post. This theory was supported by the fact that Hayes had access to a vehicle and might have used it to leave the base area, and by the absence of any evidence suggesting foul play or accidental death. The desertion theory was also convenient for military authorities, as it provided a neat explanation for Hayes' disappearance that didn't require extensive resources to investigate or suggest serious security breaches. The classification of Hayes as a deserter was devastating to his family in Cedar City, Utah. His parents, Reverend William Hayes and his wife Martha, refused to believe that their son would abandon his duty and bring shame upon his family and community. They wrote numerous letters to military authorities, pleading for continued investigation and insisting that Robert would never voluntarily leave his post without explanation. The Hayes family's protests were met with polite but firm responses from military bureaucrats who explained that all reasonable efforts had been made to locate Robert and that the evidence, or lack thereof, strongly suggested that he had left his post voluntarily. The official position was that further investigation would not be productive and that the case would remain open but inactive unless new evidence came to light. The social stigma of having a son classified as a deserter was particularly painful in a small religious community like Cedar City. Friends and neighbors, while outwardly supportive, could not help but whisper about the Hayes boy who had brought shame to his family by running away from his duty. The Reverend Hayes found his moral authority in the community, subtly undermined by the suggestion that he had failed to instill proper values in his son. Meanwhile, Weber continued his espionage activities at Wendover, taking advantage of the confusion surrounding Hayes' disappearance to expand his intelligence-gathering operations. The successful elimination of the one person who had posed a serious threat to his mission gave him increased confidence and freedom to pursue his objectives. Over the following months, he was able to gather and transmit detailed information about American bombing techniques, aircraft performance, and training procedures that proved valuable to German military planners. Weber's success in maintaining his cover while conducting espionage operations was facilitated by the kind of institutional blindness that often affects organizations during periods of rapid expansion and high stress. The sheer volume of personnel and activities at Wendover made it difficult for security personnel to maintain close surveillance of everyone, and Weber's carefully cultivated reputation for reliability and cooperation made him one of the last people who would be suspected of subversive activities. The intelligence information that Weber gathered and transmitted to Germany through clandestine communication networks included detailed assessments of American bomber crews' training procedures, evaluations of aircraft vulnerabilities and defensive capabilities, and reports on new tactics and technologies being developed for use in the European theater. This information contributed to the development of German air defense strategies that increased the effectiveness of their fighter aircraft and anti-aircraft artillery against American bombing raids. As 1942 gave way to 1943, Weber received new instructions from his handlers that expanded his mission beyond simple intelligence gathering to include sabotage operations designed to disrupt American training activities and reduce the effectiveness of bomber crews being prepared for combat deployment. These operations required careful planning and execution to avoid detection while maximizing their impact on American military capabilities. The sabotage operations that Weber conducted were subtle and difficult to detect, designed to appear as equipment failures, training accidents, or human error rather than deliberate acts of enemy action. He arranged for aircraft engines to develop problems during training flights, caused navigation equipment to malfunction at critical moments, and introduced errors into training materials that would degrade the effectiveness of bomber crews without being obvious enough to attract attention. Each successful sabotage operation increased Weber's value to the German intelligence apparatus, while also increasing the risks he faced of eventual detection and exposure. Every act of sabotage created the possibility that investigations might uncover evidence of deliberate interference, and each success brought him closer to the attention of American counterintelligence services that were becoming increasingly sophisticated in their methods of detecting enemy agents. The first sign that Weber's activities might be under suspicion came in mid-1943, when he noticed changes in security procedures at the prisoner compound that suggested increased surveillance of prisoner activities. Guards seemed to be paying closer attention to prisoner movements and communications, and several routine privileges that prisoners had previously enjoyed were quietly eliminated or restricted. Weber also became aware that some of his fellow prisoners were being questioned more intensively about their backgrounds and activities, suggesting that American intelligence services had begun to suspect that not all of the prisoners were what they claimed to be. These developments forced Weber to reduce his activities and take additional precautions to avoid detection, but they also indicated that his time at Wendover might be limited. The decision to relocate Weber to a different facility came in late 1943, when American intelligence services received information suggesting that German agents were operating within the POW population at Wendover. Rather than conduct a massive investigation that might compromise ongoing counterintelligence operations, authorities decided to transfer suspected prisoners to other facilities where they could be more closely monitored and where their activities would be more limited. Weber's transfer to a maximum security facility in Colorado effectively ended his espionage and sabotage activities, but it also removed him from the scene of his crimes and made it virtually impossible for investigators to connect him to Hayes' disappearance. The transfer was conducted quietly, without fanfare or explanation, and Weber simply vanished from Wendover as completely as his victim had disappeared into the desert. The end of the war in 1945 brought new complications to Weber's situation. As a German prisoner of war, he was technically eligible for repatriation to Germany, but his true identity and activities made him valuable to American intelligence services who wanted to debrief him about German espionage operations and potentially use him as a source of information about enemy intelligence networks. Weber found himself in the unique position of being simultaneously a war criminal, a valuable intelligence asset, and a problem that nobody quite knew how to handle. His expertise in intelligence operations and his knowledge of German spy networks made him too valuable to simply execute or return to Germany, but his crimes made him too dangerous to simply release into American society. The solution that was eventually developed involved a form of witness protection program that allowed Weber to assume a new identity and disappear into American society in exchange for his cooperation with ongoing intelligence operations. This arrangement was kept secret from all but the highest levels of government, and Weber's new identity was so carefully constructed that even decades later it would be almost impossible to trace. Under his new identity as Karl Brennan, a German immigrant who had arrived in America before the war, Weber settled in a small town in Montana where he could live quietly while maintaining periodic contact with intelligence handlers. He married a local woman, established a small business, and became a respected member of the community, all while carrying the secret of his wartime activities and the knowledge that he had murdered an American soldier in cold blood. For more than 4 decades, Weber lived his double life successfully, gradually aging from a dangerous enemy agent into what appeared to be a harmless elderly immigrant who had made a good life for himself in America. He contributed to local charities, attended community events, and even served on the town council for several years, all while hiding his true past from everyone around him. The only person who knew Weber's real identity was his intelligence handler, an FBI agent who maintained periodic contact and ensured that Weber continued to provide useful information about German intelligence operations and personnel. This relationship continued even after Weber's usefulness as an active source had ended, partly to maintain security and partly because Weber had become something of an institutional memory for American intelligence services. Weber's death in 1987 at the age of 78 appeared to close the final chapter in his remarkable story of deception and murder. His obituary in the local Montana newspaper described him as a beloved community member who had overcome the hardships of immigration and war to build a successful life in America. The few people who attended his funeral had no idea that they were mourning a man whose crimes had never been discovered or punished. But Weber's death did not end the story of Robert Hayes, whose fate remained unknown to his family and to history. The Hayes family had never stopped believing that their son was innocent of desertion and that somehow, someday, the truth about his disappearance would be revealed. Reverend Hayes died in 1963, still hoping for answers, and Martha Hayes followed in 1971, taking to her grave the pain of never knowing what had really happened to her boy. The decades that followed saw occasional attempts to reopen the Hayes case, usually triggered by the discovery of other wartime mysteries or by new technologies that offered hope of solving old cases, but without any physical evidence or reliable witnesses, these efforts inevitably failed to produce results, and the case remained officially unsolved and inactive. The breakthrough that would finally solve the mystery came from an unexpected source: an archaeological survey being conducted in advance of a planned solar energy facility in the desert near the former Wendover Air Base. The survey, required by federal environmental regulations, was designed to identify and preserve any historically significant artifacts or sites that might be affected by the construction project. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, the lead archaeologist on the project, was conducting a routine surface survey when she noticed what appeared to be a depression in the desert floor that didn't match the natural topography of the area. Her trained eye recognized the subtle signs that might indicate human activity: stones arranged in unnatural patterns, changes in vegetation growth, and slight variations in soil color that could suggest previous disturbance. The decision to investigate the anomaly more closely was driven by scientific curiosity rather than any suspicion that it might be connected to a crime. Martinez and her team began careful excavation of the site, using standard archaeological techniques to preserve any artifacts or information that might be present. The first indication that they had discovered something unusual came when the excavation uncovered fragments of fabric that appeared to be much newer than the prehistoric artifacts they had expected to find. The fabric was clearly military in origin and appeared to date from the 1940s era based on its weave and dye patterns. Further excavation revealed additional artifacts that confirmed the team's growing suspicion that they had discovered something connected to the military history of Wendover Air Base: metal objects that appeared to be military insignia, buttons from a military uniform, and most significantly, a corroded but readable dog tag bearing the name Robert Hayes and his serial number. The discovery of human remains alongside these artifacts immediately transformed the archaeological survey into a criminal investigation. Dr. Martinez contacted local law enforcement authorities, who in turn notified federal agencies with jurisdiction over crimes involving military personnel. Within hours, the site was secured and a joint investigation was launched, involving the FBI, military investigators, and the Utah State Police. The forensic examination of the remains confirmed that they belonged to a young male who had died approximately 80 years earlier, consistent with the time frame of Hayes' disappearance. More importantly, the examination revealed evidence of trauma that was inconsistent with accidental death or natural causes. The victim had died from a knife wound to the chest, and the positioning of the remains suggested that the body had been deliberately buried. The FBI's investigation into the Hayes case was complicated by the passage of time and the deaths of virtually all the potential witnesses. However, the agency's archives contained extensive files from the original investigation, including detailed interviews with all personnel who had been present at Wendover during the period of Hayes' disappearance. Among these files was the interview with Klaus Weber, the German prisoner who had been present during Hayes' final evening. The FBI investigators noted Weber's helpful demeanor and his apparent concern about Hayes' disappearance, but they also recognized that his position and knowledge made him a potential suspect in the murder. The challenge facing investigators was that Weber had been transferred from Wendover decades earlier and had subsequently disappeared into the American population under circumstances that were still classified. Locating him, if he was still alive, would require cooperation from intelligence agencies and access to classified files that might reveal his true identity and whereabouts. The breakthrough came when FBI investigators gained access to previously classified files from the post-war intelligence operations that had involved captured German prisoners. These files revealed Weber's true identity as Klaus Richter, a German intelligence agent, and documented his cooperation with American intelligence services in exchange for protection and a new identity. The files also revealed that Richter had been relocated to Montana under the name Carl Brennan and had lived there until his death in 1987. Most importantly, the files contained Richter's detailed confession of his wartime activities, including his admission that he had killed an American soldier at Wendover Air Base in order to protect his cover as a spy. The confession, written as part of Richter's debriefing by American intelligence services, provided a detailed account of the planning and execution of Hayes' murder. Richter described how he had identified Hayes as a threat to his mission, how he had arranged for the fatal work detail, and how he had disposed of the body in the desert. The confession even included a rough map showing the location where Hayes had been buried, which corresponded closely to the site where Dr. Martinez had made her discovery. The revelation that Hayes had been murdered by a German spy rather than having deserted his post sent shockwaves through the military and intelligence communities. The case represented not only a long-delayed resolution to a World War II mystery, but also a glimpse into the shadowy world of wartime espionage and the moral compromises that had been made in the name of national security. For the Hayes family, now represented by distant relatives who had kept alive the memory of Robert Hayes, the discovery brought a mixture of vindication and sorrow. The family had been right to insist that Robert would never have deserted his post, but the truth about his fate was far more tragic than they could have imagined. The military held a ceremony at Arlington National Cemetery to honor Robert Hayes and to officially correct the record regarding his service and death. His name was added to the rolls of service members who had died in combat, and his family was presented with the medals and recognition that had been denied them for more than 8 decades. The case also prompted a broader re-examination of other unsolved disappearances from World War II, as investigators recognized that German espionage operations had been far more extensive and sophisticated than previously understood. Several other cases were reopened based on information contained in classified files, leading to the solution of additional mysteries that had puzzled authorities for decades. In Wendover, Utah, a memorial was erected at the site where Hayes' remains had been discovered. The memorial, a simple granite marker surrounded by desert wildflowers, bears Hayes' name and the inscription, "In memory of those who served in silence and died for freedom." The site has become a place of pilgrimage for military families and historians interested in the lesser-known aspects of World War II. The resolution of the Hayes case after 82 years stands as a testament to the persistence of those who refuse to accept injustice and the power of modern investigative techniques to solve even the oldest mysteries. It demonstrates that the truth, no matter how deeply buried or carefully concealed, can eventually be brought to light through the combination of scientific advancement, dedicated investigation, and simple chance. The story of Robert Hayes and Klaus Richter serves as a reminder of the hidden casualties of war and the complex moral landscape that emerges when nations fight for their survival. It illustrates the personal cost of larger historical events and the importance of remembering that behind every statistic and strategic decision are individual human beings whose lives and deaths deserve to be remembered and honored. As the investigation files were finally closed in 2024, they carried with them the lessons learned from one of World War II's most carefully concealed crimes. The story of the young artillery sergeant who died protecting his country from enemy espionage had finally been told, bringing closure to a mystery that had haunted the Utah desert for more than 8 decades and ensuring that Robert Hayes would be remembered not as a deserter but as a hero who gave his life in service to his nation.